I love the ending to that. Yeah, we probably needed another bottle of wine for the second half of that, but it was but
Absolutely.
it was brilliant, Bob. I mean, I'm joined by Bob Maughon, who's CTO CSO of Savic. Thank you very much, Bob, for joining me for closing remarks. It was a brilliant session, highly technical. I don't know what to extract from it and what not to extract from it.
Mhm.
I don't know if you made this comment or Brian did. There will be no perfect solution because you've got this scenario of building a decarbonized future, but there's a lot of unknowns, especially when it comes to investment. And I
Mhm.
think if people see it as they used to see it when they run a refinery, an oil and gas plant, or anywhere like that, it's going to fail. Because if you're constantly looking for payback, then it's not going to happen. And I think that's what people have to get their heads around. And I think you mentioned at the end as well, and you're absolutely right. I think that's sometimes a bit of a problem with this industry as well, that is used to probably having a very high return on investment. So, from your point, Bob, what role do you see collaboration playing in driving this path to net zero? Because there's a lot of barriers, a lot of different approaches, a lot of different collaborations. But what sort of role do you see that playing in the future?
Yeah, look. I think it's collaboration is going to be essential to this transition. And I think it plays out in a number of ways. I mean, I think short term, when it comes to things like carbon capture, when it comes to leveraging hydrogen, when it comes to leveraging waste, as we talked about in the circular economy, or whether it comes to leveraging greater renewable energy in our footprint, it requires collaboration, and I think a unique collaboration, which is a challenge, which is collaboration sometimes with parts of our value chain that we didn't typically view as collaboration partners in the past. You know, dialogues that we're having to have now with the renewable energy sector and with the electricity, regulatory framework on, how are we going to supply greater renewable energy into
Mm.
our footprint? Engagement with waste collectors and suppliers and converters on how we're going to manage waste as part of a circular economy. Engagements with governments on how to manage these large carbon capture consortia that we're going to see coming up. So those are unique challenges because I think we're not used to having those dialogues, and sometimes we don't speak the same language. I mean, we may have the same purpose
Mm.
at the end, but we don't speak about the problem in the same way. And I would also add collaboration within our industry has to be different. Um,
Yeah.
we're not going to de-risk some of these technologies by focusing solely on, only in-house developed technologies, only with our own control over IP, only our way going forward. I mean, it's too risky. There are too many options. It makes sense to smartly collaborate. I mean, I think one thing I'm proud of being a part of is we're as Sabic, a member, we talked about the alliance and the panel to end plastic waste, but also within the World Economic Forum, we're part of an industry group that's working on low carbon emitting technologies with many of my peer companies. And that's a great place for us to collaborate on what technologies are going to be the future for decarbonizing our sector. And from that dialogue, is where we ended up in our partnership with BSF on the e-cracker. But I'll use that as just an example of I think you're going to see more of these. I mean, we might not have wanted to collaborate with a peer like that, in the past, right? Because we'd be worried about our position in the market and our
Yeah.
technology capability. And the reality is, we need to share some of that risk together. We need to do it smartly. It's hard to do a project with 10 players all working together on one solution. You might spend 3 years getting the agreement signed, but you need to look at smart collaborations where you each bring something to it. And I think in the BSF Lindy case, uh, BSF and Sabic and Lindy all brought a little bit different approach to the electrification of the cracker, which I won't go into the details here today, but different technology approaches. But also an execution capability with Lindy in terms of being a licensor and being in that market already, and as well a geographic spread between BSF and SABIC to understand how we can participate differently and where these solutions might fit. And I think those kind of
Mm.
collaborations, although it may be tough to pull together because of the concerns of the past of how you manage your business, we have to look at them differently. That's what I would say. I think we have to approach them that way because we can't afford to parallel all the different solutions and hope that we make the right choices. I mean, it's not going to make sense going forward to do it the old way.
It's an interesting point you said about collaboration because we've seen that a lot across upstream, midstream, downstream for oil and gas, petrochemicals everywhere. You see a lot of even vendor to vendor collaborations, which you've never would have thought that would happen probably a few years ago. And I think what you said there about your collaboration with BASF, would you have done that a few years ago? Probably not. But now it's like, right, we're not going to get there alone. We need to have this sort of genuine collaboration where people have different skill sets and combine them together. And I think that's a very good point. But what do you see in terms of technology, though? Because obviously you talk about the technology you're working on with them, but in terms of the next 10 years or the next 30 years, to deliver on this, carbon neutral, net zero path, what's going to emerge? What do you see emerging? What's going to happen? Because we've heard of a number of views today, but it'd be good to get your view on that particular theme.
Yeah, I think that I think it was some of that well captured by the panel. I mean, if you get everybody together and debate on what technology solution is gonna win at the end of the day for this journey, I think we'll end up in a large argument probably. But we know that all these technologies are gonna play a part, and I think the regional components play a big deal in what you implement in an asset. And people may ask, well, why is that the case? Well, if I look at examples like the UK or Saudi Arabia, where I have great access to carbon capture capability, there might be a significant play for blue hydrogen. If I look at areas where there's a very low cost potential for renewable electricity, and I'll use Saudi Arabia again as an example, then I think you're going to see the growth of green hydrogen also playing a significant role in addition to blue. And so, and if you look at areas where maybe access to either of those is not at the level that you want, and carbon capture is a challenge, like in parts of Europe, I think you're going to see electrification play a more significant role. And I think it's not, that one path is right or wrong. I think it's that, you have to take advantage of the resources and geology, available to you to work with. So look, I see personally, and this is, based on just my experience of, whether I'm right or wrong, I think the time will tell, but I think that green hydrogen is gonna outpace in cost blue long term. The data suggests that as we start to scale green, the cost curve parity comes actually fairly quickly, and some consultants would say as soon as 2030. Whether that's accurate or not, you're going to see more closer parity on the costs over time. And so then a tough question is going to come. One, do you believe that? When do you believe it's going to happen? And what's your view on the benefits and risks of blue, right? Are you concerned about, regulatory involvement on carbon capture? Are you concerned about maybe, engagement and concern over petrochemicals and methane loss and other issues as well? So I think it's important to parallel these things. I mean, electrification, I think from the panel you heard Brian make the point, electrifying all the furnaces, I don't think is going to be the solution to solve the global issue either, because of the power demand that's needed to do that. But there are going to be clear cases where that's going to play a role, clear cases where hydrogen is going to play a role. And in some cases, you might very well just want to do direct capture of CO2 at the back end of the furnace. So for us, it's important to, one, have a clear path right now. I think as we talked about, Adam, and the panel, like we can't just wait for the perfect solution. We have to address carbon capture where we can do it on high CO2 streams that exist. We have to invest in renewable electricity, committing to offtake and investment on that front. And we have to invest in technologies, whether it be things like electrification or new routes to produce our olefins, for example. And we have to also invest in, we have a strong venture capital team within my organization that looks at investments in startups that can invest in technologies that can be enabling for the future. So we have to parallel these things. We have to make smart decisions on our assets today, and we have to make sure that we're investing now on these more transformative technologies. And for those that have been around the industry for a long time, the hardest thing to do in the petrochemical sector is to implement a new process technology for the base building blocks that we make, right? And why is that? Well, I mean, look, if you take the ethylene complex, the whole downstream is built on that running effectively and consistently. All the other capital runs off of that. And so to make a change there that might disrupt the operations of your whole facility is a huge undertaking. And then the capital involved in those operations is immense. And you build those for, 30 to 50 years, right? So transformation in that sector is extremely tough. But we can, and so what would typically happen is you develop a nice process technology, you would bring it to your leadership, and the leadership would say, "Oh, this looks great, but we're heading into a down cycle, so we can't afford to pilot that technology today. We'll look at it on the
Yeah.
up cycle." And then when you come into the up cycle, they ask you what technologies you have, and you don't have anything to offer. And this, you laugh. Believe me, I've laughed and cried over this for a long time. We have to take steps now to pilot things that we think
Yeah.
they're going to play a part, and they're a small part of the cost of the transition. They're an extremely small part of the capital associated with the decarbonization. I think that's the one difference now, is that we look
Mm.
ahead and we know the tens of billions of dollars that a 2050 carbon neutrality target is going to take. Piloting technologies to de-risk better solutions for that, where you're spending tens of millions of dollars, is a wise decision. But we didn't have those drivers, right? The drivers before were, it's got to be better than an existing ethane or naphtha,
Yeah.
cracker. And to do that, nobody's going to invest unless you see 20, 30, 40% improvement, which is very tough to do. So I think that dynamic has just changed fundamentally. I think you're going
Mm.
to see companies willing to take that risk. I know that we're willing to take those kind of investment risks. But I don't know that we're going to know fully what the answers are going to be, right? And I think that you will see us piloting not just technologies, but business models and solutions over the next 10 years that we think will be scalable, learning from those so that in the 2030 to 2050 period, we're implementing technologies that we think meet those criteria and the market values. Because again, I think the last thing that we didn't touch a lot on in the panel, we don't produce products because that's our job, right? We produce products because the market values what we do. And the moment the
Exactly.
market stops, the moment the market stops valuing what we do, we don't really have a purpose anymore. And so
Yeah.
I think that's the one piece that, like, it's very important that we're testing the market, we're piloting technologies, we're engaging with the value chain to understand the direction they're headed, and we're making sure that we supply what the market and consumers and society needs, uh, and guide where we think the most carbon efficient solutions are to meet that. So I think it's going to be a tough period this next 10 years as I think we make missteps. We try technologies that don't meet the needs. But it's essential that we're investing in this period because that's how you'll deliver on the 2050 objective.
It's interesting you said that because it's fail fast, learn. Is it fail fast, learn quicker? I know there's so many different
Yeah,
acronyms and sayings on things like this, and
yeah,
you sort of raised a good point because when we start talking about geographical sustainability, I mean, I think Chris Whitton talked about the offshore wind side of obviously what you've got in the UK, more so than other countries. But then you've got, what you've got Gulf of Mexico, that's big on sort of CCUS. And I think
yeah.
geographically, it does depend, doesn't it, on what you've got available. There's no
Yes.
right or wrong. It's just scaling up what you can scale up within your given area. That being said, how do you see regional pressure on sustainability? For example, obviously in Europe, as a global producer, how do you weigh investment if the pressures are not applied, equitably across regions? Because that's a big concern at the moment.
Yeah, look, I think that's a huge concern. I would say though that when we used to get this question 5 years ago, it
Yeah,
was, well, look, we're not gonna act because regional dynamics are not equitable, and so we're gonna proceed on our path and assume that at the end of the day nobody's gonna comply and we don't have to deal with these issues. I think we're past that point now. Look, I think
yeah,
regional pressures are going to impact investment in certain regions. But if I take the European case, you clearly see a focus on increasing cost in Europe to operate because of the regulatory environment around carbon. But if you want to participate in that market, whether you produce in Europe or you produce outside, you're also going to face those pressures, right? And you're going to see things like carbon border adjustments and other things happen. So, as a producer like Sabic, where we, although we have a footprint in Europe and Asia and the U.S., we have a significant part of our footprint in Saudi Arabia. We understand that export mindset, and Europe's a critical market we have to serve, right? So at the end, I don't think any of us can sort of run away from sort of the accountability now on how to address it. I do think it will have an impact, Adam, to your point on uh, this question of aged assets or underperforming assets. Does it make more sense to reinvest and upgrade those, or does it make sense to idle assets and build new assets with new capability? And will that play out differently region to region? It could, right? It could, especially when you look at carbon capture, and if large carbon capture hubs are going to go in, does that lead people to start to build new capacity tied to these hubs, and areas that don't invest there maybe don't have the same ability for growth? I mean, I think that's a critical
Mm,
question to think about. But I don't think it's going to happen because there is or isn't a carbon tax in a country, because I think at the end, these are all markets we have to service, so we have to make sure we can be competitive. And our approach there is, we're moving into a phase now where we're being much more explicit in our business planning process on the cost of carbon, the cost of it from a regulatory standpoint, in terms of either tax or cap and trade, but also from an abatement cost to address it perspective and a shadow carbon cost, because we have to think about our future investments and understand what it's going to take, not because of the region's regulatory environment only, but also what is it just going to cost us to decarbonize. And that's going to set a lot of our strategies. And again, I view it less as a driver on the regulatory front and more of a what's going to be the most cost effective way to abate if I'm growing.
yeah.
We talked a lot about our existing assets and decarbonizing them, but we're as SABIC on an incredible growth journey for the future as well, and more to come on that. But to support our growth, we have to look at it as, one, how do we address the carbon footprint of our existing assets, but also how do we build assets that are carbon neutral? And
Yeah.
so that's also going to be a big piece of where does that growth happen? How do you do it effectively? How do growth projects look when you look at these broader investments? And so I think that will have a bigger play on where investment happens, is when you start thinking about growth and how do you build that growth story in a way that you have to start on it from a carbon neutral view of solutions. Does that lead to some concentrated investments because of the regional dynamics, whether it be low cost, low carbon energy, or whether it be carbon capture? Do those, maybe lead to a better set of solutions there or not? And I hope that does happen, because what it will drive is then more, I think, engagement with governments on what it takes to invest in their regions to get the right environment to make enabling. So I see that pressure as a good pressure.
It's a good point to finish on. I think we had it earlier in the panel. I don't know which one it was, but there was a lot of talk about how regulation will accelerate energy transition. I think there's still a bit of a question mark over the two, actually, in different countries. So it's going to be interesting to see how it pans out. Are we making the right steps? And I think it comes from us. It comes from companies like you and sort of your leadership on how you're going to really show what you're doing, on the innovation side as well. So, but it's fantastic. Look, Bob, it's fantastic to hear from you. First of all, you're brilliant on the panel, but it was brilliant to hear from you properly now as well, with some Q&A, because I think the audience, it's good for them to understand what you're doing and sort of your perceptions of the decarbonisation pathways, or so we call it.
Sure.
So thank you very much, Bob, for joining me, and I hope to also speak with you very soon on these topics.
Great. Thanks, Adam. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks a lot. Cheers, Bob. Well, we've come to the end. What a phenomenal day. It's really brilliant to amalgamate technology and innovation and decarbonisation. I think the last panel said it all. We had a really brilliant technical piece of professional speakers and sort of thought leaders talking about where we're going to be going within this industry. I think the downstream sector is certainly heading towards a very interesting next sort of 5 or 10 years. So it was a brilliant way to sort of end a thoroughly enjoyable day. I think what I enjoyed the most today was sort of all the technical contributions we had. I love the fact that we talked a lot about technology. There was obviously within the agenda, you had a good combination, because you had a decarbonisation panel and you had an innovation panel, but a lot of it was crossing over. And I found that really, really interesting. Just to sort of reiterate what I said earlier about, how sort of AI and machine learning and digital twin crossed over on sort of decarbonisation. I think that's certainly the way forward with a lot of the downstream companies, chemical manufacturers and refineries. So fantastic day. Do let me know your feedback, especially on your favourite parts of the day. What we want to know is, what you want to talk about. I hope you engaged enough and you enjoyed it. And feel free to obviously post any questions that you want answered or any sort of comments you want as well. But it was a fantastic day, very thought-provoking for me. We will be back tomorrow at 9:30 for an equally enticing agenda. So please join me then. Have a fantastic evening. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you again tomorrow. Have a lovely evening.